Folks down here in the Atchafalaya Basin say the swamp's alive in ways most people can't see, and I reckon they're right. Because last spring, when the cypress trees were thick with pollen and the air hung heavy as wet cotton, I saw something that still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it. My name's Lionel, and I've spent all my 42 years guiding folks through these waters, showing them gators sunning on logs and pointing out herons perched like statues in the shallows. My daddy did this work before me, and his daddy before him, and I thought I'd learned every trick the swamp could play, until that one afternoon proved me dead wrong. I'm the kind of man who knows every turn and bend of these bayous, where the water runs black under the tupelo trees, and how the wind sounds different when it's about to rain. I've always felt safe out here, like the swamp, and I had an understanding. But that day showed me there are corners of this place where even a man like me doesn't belong. I'd taken a couple out from Lafayette who wanted to see the quiet parts of the swamp, away from the airboat crowds, so we drifted down a channel so narrow the Spanish moss practically brushed our shoulders. It was the kind of day when the world feels muted except for the buzz of insects and the gentle lap of water against the pirogue. The heat was rising off the water in shimmering waves, and I could taste the salt and decay in the breeze, mixed with the sweet scent of blooming swamp iris. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how the hush settled over us like a soft blanket, and for a moment I felt lucky to call this my office. We'd just rounded a bend when I noticed the water ahead rippling in tight circles, like a handful of pebbles had been dropped in the same spot over and over. Something about those ripples felt deliberate, like they were being made on purpose. At first I thought it was just a big gar rolling beneath the surface, or maybe an alligator stirring up the bottom mud, but as we got closer, I saw eyes glinting low over the water, set wide apart and staring straight at me. Except these eyes weren't shaped like any gator or catfish I'd ever seen. They were rounder, and there was a strange glow to them, like lantern light shining through amber. My clients didn't notice, busy looking at an egret preening its feathers, but I kept my paddle still and just watched. The creature rose higher out of the water, slow and deliberate, until I realized it was an enormous otter, but bigger than any river otter that ought to live here, at least 7 feet from nose to tail, with fur slick and black as oil and whiskers long as reeds. Its head seemed too broad, and its eyes followed me with this eerie intelligence, as though it knew me, or knew something about me I'd forgotten. I'd seen plenty of otters before, playful little things rolling and diving, but this one had an air of something ancient about it, something that made the fine hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. It stared at me in total silence, except for its soft, rhythmic huffing breath, and in that moment the swamp seemed to lean in close, as if listening too. The air felt different, sharper somehow, carrying a faint scent like crushed mint and mud. I felt pinned in place, like its eyes were holding me still. It's hard to explain how something like that can make you feel small, but I swear it did. My heart was pounding so loud I thought the couple behind me might hear it echoing off the cypress trunks. The creature lingered for maybe half a minute, though it felt like hours, before slipping backward into the water without a single splash, leaving the surface glassy and still, except for a few drifting lily pads. For a few seconds, I half expected it to reappear right beside the boat, or to grab the gunwale and haul itself aboard, but the water stayed calm, save for tiny bubbles popping where it had gone under. My clients asked if there were manatees this far north, laughing like it was a joke. I told them no and forced a smile, though I felt my hands trembling as I dipped the paddle again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still down there, moving beneath the surface, circling us, waiting for the right moment. We carried on through the channels, the couple chatting about how beautiful the swamp was, but I barely heard them. Every rustle in the brush made me twitch, every swirl of water set my pulse racing. I kept looking over my shoulder, half certain I'd see those amber eyes staring back at me from the shadows. I've been on this water my whole life, and I've faced gators, cottonmouths, sudden storms, But nothing ever rattled me like that otter did. It's like it peeled back a layer of the swamp I wasn't meant to see. Later that night, I sat out on my porch, listening to the frogs and distant hoot owls, trying to convince myself it was just a freakishly big animal. But deep down, I know it wasn't just the size. It was how it looked at me, like it understood me in a way no animal should. I haven't told many folks about it because people would think I'd been drinking or maybe seen a shadow in the water. But sometimes, especially on hot, breathless nights, I catch myself listening for that strange huffing sound, or scanning the water for eyes glowing like twin lanterns. And once in a while, when the swamp goes real quiet, I feel certain it's still out there, gliding beneath the surface, waiting to look me in the eye again. Sometimes I wonder if it's a warning or a sign, or maybe just the swamp reminding me that it'll always hold secrets I'll never fully know. And this is just the beginning. What comes next still keeps me awake at night. People in these parts believe the swamp don't give up its secrets easy, but sometimes it whispers them to folks who ain't even looking. Back in 1999, I was 27, working nights at a shrimp processing plant near Morgan City, saving up to buy a little house of my own. My shift ended around 3 in the morning, and most times I'd drive the old levee road home, windows down, letting the smell of salt and mud clear the fishy stink off me. I wasn't married yet, and the quiet of those early hours suited me fine. I liked how the fog clung to the cypress trees, how the stars blinked in puddles on the blacktop. I thought I knew these swamps inside and out. But one night, I learned there's always things out here you'd rather not see. It was a sticky May night, and I remember how the air felt thick as syrup when I stepped out the plant's back door. Crickets were screaming loud in the brush, and my shirt clung to me with sweat. I started driving slow along the levee road, headlights washing over palmettos and Spanish moss. Somewhere past Lake Palourde, I caught a flicker of motion on the right shoulder. At first I figured it was a possum or maybe a raccoon scavenging for scraps, but as I eased closer, I realized it was something taller, moving on 2 legs. My foot slipped off the gas. It stood there, half in the ditch, hunched over like it was rooting through the grass for something. The fur was dark and matted, and the shape of its shoulders reminded me of a bear, only leaner, almost bony. Its arms were long, nearly reaching its knees, and it turned its head toward my truck so slow it made my skin crawl. I've hunted and trapped since I was a kid. I've seen bobcats, black bears, coyotes, even a panther once, though folks say they're all gone. But this creature's face was nothing like I'd ever seen. Its snout was short, almost like a dog's, but its eyes were sunk deep and glowed bright green in the high beams. It blinked once, then bared yellow teeth so crooked it looked like they'd grown in every which way. My engine idled loud in the silence, and I felt every hair on my arms stand up. The creature gave a sudden shake of its head, like it was clearing water from its ears, then let out this low, grumbling whine that vibrated the air between us. I thought about backing up, but I was scared to take my eyes off it. The thing shifted weight from foot to foot, then stood up straighter, and that's when I saw it was holding something small in its clawed hand, a turtle or maybe a big frog. It lifted the creature to its mouth, bit down with a crack and swallowed. I almost gagged. The creature sniffed the air toward me, lips quivering like it could taste the sweat rolling down my face. For a moment, I felt like it was deciding whether I was worth the trouble. Then it dropped back down on all fours, spun around, and slipped into the cane thicket beside the road, so silent you'd swear it vanished into smoke. I sat there breathing hard, gripping the wheel, headlights pointed into empty reeds. The night felt different suddenly, like all the usual noises. The frogs, the insects, had sucked themselves into hiding. My truck's fan hummed and sweat trickled down my spine. I eased forward slowly, afraid the creature might charge out again. I drove home with my hands locked on the wheel, every shadow on the road looking like it might stand up and block my path. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I shut off the truck and just sat there listening to the quiet, trying to convince myself I'd seen a bear with mange or some other half-sick animal. But the next morning, I went back out there after sunrise. I couldn't help myself. I pulled over where I'd seen it and climbed down into the ditch. The grass was all flattened, and there were claw marks in the muddy slope leading into the cane. I found broken turtle shells scattered around, and a thin smear of blood in the dirt. I stood there staring at those tracks, trying to measure them against my boot. They were long and narrow, toes tipped with deep grooves like knife cuts. No bear leaves tracks like that. I felt the swamp pressing in around me, hot and still, as if it were watching to see what I'd do next. I never told anyone at the plant, because who's going to believe a swamp creature story from the guy who smells like shrimp and fish guts all day? But sometimes I wonder if that thing's still out there, stalking the ditches for something else to eat. Or worse, watching the levee road for the next truck to come creeping by at 3 in the morning. Folks say the swamp hides what it wants to keep, and sometimes I think that creature is one of those secrets, something old, maybe older than any of us, surviving in the shadows where nobody goes. Sometimes, when the wind rattles the cane at night, I hear that same low, grumbling whine floating across the water. And whenever I drive that levee road now, I keep my windows up and my eyes sharp on the shoulders, because I've got a feeling the swamp ain't done showing me what's hiding out there. If you thought this was intense, wait until you hear the next story. It's unbelievable. It was an ordinary Tuesday when I went to check the crab traps near the edge of Bayou Black, or so I thought. My name's Josie, and I've been running my little fishing business out of Houma for nearly 15 years now. Folks around here know me as the woman with the red boat and the big straw hat, always hauling blue crab to sell down at the dock. I'm a widow, living alone except for my old mutt, Percy, who rides along on the boat most mornings. I like the quiet rhythm of the water and the smell of salt in the air, even if the work's hard and my hands stay raw from the ropes. But that one Tuesday, something happened that made me question how well I really knew these swamps. The sky was overcast that morning, low clouds hanging like a wool blanket, and the water was calm as glass. Percy sat on the bow, nose lifted, sniffing the breeze. I'd set my traps out by a narrow cut where the bayou slides between high banks of cane and palmetto, a place where the water's darker and the current moves slow. It's usually good for big crabs, but sometimes the mud stirs up so thick it looks like black coffee. As I pulled the boat closer, I noticed a patch of bubbles roiling the surface, big ones, like something was exhaling from underneath. I've seen gas leaks, turtles, even garfish that'll stir up the mud. But this felt different. The bubbles were wide apart, rising in pairs as if they came from nostrils. I cut the motor and drifted closer, squinting through the gloom. The smell hit me first, a sharp, musky scent, like wet fur and something sour. Percy let out a soft growl, which is rare for him. He's a lazy dog who usually sleeps through thunder. Then I saw it. A broad, pale back breaking the surface, ridged like an alligator, but smooth and glistening, almost silver in the dim light. At first I thought it was just a big gator turned upside down, belly up for some reason. But then it rolled, and I saw a long snout, more like a dolphin's, with rows of sharp, needle-like teeth catching the light. Its eyes were small, dark, and set high on its skull, and they blinked twice before locking on me. I froze, one hand still clutching the boat rail. The creature hovered half in, half out of the water, its sides moving as it breathed. It was longer than my boat, had to be 12 feet at least, and its skin shimmered like fish scales, but thicker, like armor plates. It let out a low, crooning noise, almost musical. But there was an edge to it that made the hair on my arm stand straight up. Percy barked, a high, panicked sound, and tried to scramble into my lap. The creature's eyes flicked toward him, and it sank an inch lower, as if preparing to lunge. My heart slammed in my chest so hard, I felt it in my throat. I've dealt with gators plenty, but this was something else, something older and smarter, like a creature carved into the swamp from a time before people ever set foot here. I didn't dare move. The creature seemed to be tasting the air, tilting its head side to side. The way it watched me made it feel less like an animal and more like an equal, like it was deciding if I belonged there or not. For a long few seconds, all I could hear was my own shaky breathing and the soft plip of water dripping from its snout. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it gave one slow blink and slipped backward, vanishing beneath the surface without even a splash. The water stilled, the bubbles faded, and silence fell so heavy it felt like the whole swamp was holding its breath. I sat there for a good 10 minutes, gripping the rail, scanning the water for any sign of it. Percy eventually stopped shaking, but kept his nose pressed against my side. When I finally pulled up my crab traps, I found half of them torn open, the wire mesh twisted and mangled like it had been crushed in a giant set of jaws. One trap was missing entirely, nothing left but the buoy line dangling empty into the water. I've seen gators rip a trap open before, but never that clean, and never with teeth marks so thin and sharp. On the way back to the dock, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The bayou was quiet, too quiet, as if every bird and frog decided to keep still. Even the air felt different, colder, though the sun was starting to burn through the clouds. When I got home, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, replaying the moment over and over in my mind, the way it looked at me, like it was trying to tell me something, or warn me. I keep asking myself if it was just some freak animal, maybe a mutant dolphin that wandered upriver, but deep down, I know it wasn't any creature science has a name for. It felt like the swamp showing me a piece of itself it usually keeps hidden. I haven't gone back to that narrow cut since, though folks keep asking why I've moved my traps closer to the main channel. I just tell them the crabs dried up back there. But the truth is, I don't want to see that silver hide rising out of the water again. And sometimes late at night, I wake up sure I hear that crooning song floating through the darkness outside my window. It's calling me back. That was just the beginning. You won't believe what happened next. My name's Vernon, and I've been the caretaker at a hunting camp deep in the Maurepas swamp for most of my life. But I swear, after what I saw one stormy night in October, I look at these woods with different eyes. Folks around here always say that in the swamp, you never know what's watching you from the shadows, and I used to laugh it off as just stories for scaring tourists. I've lived out here since I was a boy, helping my uncle run this old camp built on cypress pilings, far enough back that you can't see a single porch light for miles. I know the smell of rain coming before it hits, and I know the low moan the wind makes when it winds through the knees of the cypress. But that night, I realized there are corners of this swamp I've got no business thinking I understand. It had been raining 3 days straight, fat drops pounding on the tin roof, and the water had crept right up under the camp, lapping at the bottom boards. I was the only one there, just me and the hum of the propane fridge, trying to stay busy checking fuel lines and patching leaks. Around 10 o'clock, the rain eased off to a drizzle, so I stepped outside to stretch my legs and light my pipe. The swamp smelled strong and earthy, like rotting leaves and wet wood. A few bullfrogs were calling out, and a distant owl hooted somewhere across the black water. I leaned on the railing, blowing smoke into the mist, when I heard a sound I'd never heard in my life. A deep, hollow hooting, almost like a foghorn, echoing off the trees. At first I figured it was a heron, or maybe an alligator bellowing somewhere out in the floodwater. But the sound came again, closer this time, and it had a rhythm to it, a kind of mournful, pulsing note that made my chest feel tight. I stepped off the porch and shone my flashlight across the water. The beam lit up thick curtains of mist swirling between the trees. For a second, I saw movement, a tall shape gliding through the flooded undergrowth, moving smoother than anything on legs ought to. It looked pale, almost white, with flashes of dark bands along its back. My first thought was a big gator swimming upright, but gators don't glide like that, and they sure don't stand as tall as a man's shoulders. The creature kept slipping between the cypress trunks, silent except for that low, echoing hoot that rolled across the water like thunder. I felt rooted to the spot, unable to call out, barely breathing. My light caught its face for a blink. A long, narrow snout, flared nostrils, and black liquid eyes that reflected the beam like polished stones. Its skin looked scaly but soft, almost like the underbelly of a snake, and I swear I saw gill slits fluttering along its neck. The creature stopped and turned toward me. The hooting stopped mid-note, leaving a silence so deep I could hear drops of water falling off the leaves overhead. My pipe slipped from my mouth and dropped into the water. For a long second, we stared at each other. I could see the gentle rise and fall of its chest as it breathed, the way its hands or claws or maybe fins hung just below the surface. It tilted its head the way a curious dog might, and I felt this sudden wash of sadness come over me like I was witnessing something lonely and ancient. Then it made a soft chuffing sound and slowly sank into the water, leaving barely a ripple behind. The mist swallowed it, and it was gone. I stood there for what felt like forever, flashlight trembling in my grip, my breath fogging in the damp air. When I finally managed to turn around and go back inside, my knees felt weak as river weeds. I locked the door and sat down at the wooden table, dripping swamp water onto the floor, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But as I sat there, the camp started creaking around me like it does in rising water, and I could have sworn I heard that same low hoot drifting in from the dark, softer this time, as if the creature was calling for me to come back out. The next morning, I took the pirogue and paddled around the spot where I'd seen it. The water was high and brown, leaves and sticks swirling in little eddies. I found a place where the cypress knees were broken and pushed aside like something big had moved through. I dipped my paddle into the mud and pulled up a piece of slimy, pale skin, thin as onion peel, shining with a silvery sheen. I held it in my hand until it slipped back into the water and disappeared. I sat there, staring at the circles spreading across the bayou, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I haven't told many folks about that night because most people think the swamp's just gators and snakes and mosquitoes, but I know different now. There's things out here older than any map, things that don't belong to this world anymore, but they're still here, gliding through the dark water, calling out in voices nobody understands. And some nights when the mist comes rolling in off the water, I feel that same sadness welling up in me. Like I'm supposed to remember something I never knew. This is nothing compared to what's coming up. Last summer, up around the Pearl River, I was running trot lines for catfish when I came across something that changed how I look at these waters forever. My name's Raynell, and I've been fishing this stretch between Louisiana and Mississippi since I was a kid, back when my daddy first taught me how to bait a hook with chicken liver. I'm 50 now, live alone in a little cypress shack built on stilts, and most days I'm either out on the river or mending nets in the yard. Folks say I'm a hermit, but truth is, I just like the quiet and the company of the water, but there's a hush in the swamp that sometimes feels like it's waiting to tell you a secret, and one August morning it finally told me mine. The sun was just coming up, burning pink streaks across the low clouds, and steam was rising off the river like breath. I'd started checking my lines at first light, easing the skiff through the channels while dragonflies buzzed around my shoulders. The air smelled of fish and damp wood, the kind of smell that settles into your clothes and never truly leaves. I was in the middle of lifting a big blue catfish into the boat when I heard a splash behind me, loud enough that I thought a full-grown gator had dropped off the bank. I turned fast, my heart already thumping, and that's when I saw it, a swirl of dark water rolling outward and something pale slipping beneath the surface, moving so fast I barely caught its shape. I eased the skiff closer, scanning the water, half expecting to see a gator's eyes break the surface. Instead, The water went still, flat as glass, except for a ring of bubbles slowly rising up. Then, out of nowhere, a long, thin creature burst from the water right beside the boat. It was shaped like an eel, but easily 10 feet long. Its body glistening silver and patterned with faint, ghostly stripes like old scars. Its mouth was open, showing rows of tiny needle teeth, and its eyes glowed a color I can only describe as the green of moss lit from underneath. I swear it seemed to be looking me right in the face, as if deciding what I was doing in its river. My oar slipped from my hand and clattered across the boat floor. The creature hovered upright for a split second, its skin rippling like liquid metal, then twisted and dived again with barely a splash. For a few seconds, the whole river seemed to go quiet. No birds, no frogs, not even the wind rustling the cane. My breath felt caught in my chest. I'd seen big eels before, but nothing like this. The sheer size and the way it moved, like it was half solid and half shadow, sent shivers crawling over my skin. I tried to convince myself it was just a big eel or maybe a rare fish come upriver from the Gulf, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. As I stared into the water, I noticed the bubbles coming up again, moving in a slow circle under the surface like it was pacing beneath the boat. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. I reached for my paddle and pushed away, trying not to make noise. My boat bumped softly against a sunken log, and the whole river seemed to shift under me. Then I saw it rise again, this time just its head. A smooth, flat snout, flaring gills, slits along its neck, and those eyes watching me like two lanterns glowing under the water. It made this low, warbling sound, like a cross between a gator's growl and a mourning dove's coo. I'll never forget that noise. It sounded almost sad, like it wanted to speak. The creature tilted its head to one side, blinked slowly, then disappeared into the depths so smoothly it barely disturbed the surface. I sat there, gripping my paddle, sweat rolling down my temples, not daring to move. It felt like if I spoke, I might somehow summon it back. I finished pulling my lines, but my hands were trembling so bad I kept dropping the hooks. A couple of the catfish had deep slashes on their sides, as though something with fine teeth had grazed them. I've caught plenty of fish, bitten by gars or turtles, but this was different. Clean cuts, almost surgical. When I finally headed back toward my shack, the whole way upriver felt off. Shadows seemed deeper. The splash of turtles slipping from logs made me jump. Even the birds seemed quieter, like they knew something was in the water they wanted no part of. That night, I sat on my porch staring out at the river, a lantern burning low beside me. The cicadas were screaming in the trees, but underneath it, I kept thinking I heard that warbling noise, drifting over the dark water. I keep telling myself it must have been a trick of light, a fish from some deep part of the Gulf that wandered too far inland. But part of me knows better. That creature was no ordinary eel or fish. It felt older, stranger, like it belonged to the river in a way nothing else does. I haven't gone back to that same bend since. I fish further upstream now, where the water runs clearer and the channels are wide. Folks ask me why, and I just shrug, say the fishing's better there. But every so often, when the dawn comes up pink over the trees and the water's flat and silent, I feel like it's still out there, circling under the skiff, waiting to rise again. Some say the last story is the one that'll keep you awake tonight. People say the swamps around Lake Fosse Point hold old spirits, but I always figured that was just talk folks use to explain away things they can't understand. My name's Evelyn, and I've been a park ranger here in Iberia Parish for 12 years. I'm 35, single, and perfectly content spending my days patrolling the boardwalks and back trails, watching over tourists who think they can wander off and not get lost. I love the hush of these wetlands, the smell of cypress needles, the sight of egrets gliding through sunbeams. But after one strange evening last October, there's a part of the swamp I won't go into alone anymore, no matter how much daylight's left. It was late in the season, and the humidity had finally let up a bit. The sun was dropping fast behind the trees, bleeding orange and purple into the sky. I was doing one last sweep of the North Trail, just to make sure nobody was camping where they shouldn't be. As I rounded a bend near an old tupelo grove, I caught a sharp scent on the breeze, like wet fur mixed with something metallic. It stopped me in my tracks because it didn't smell like the usual swamp funk. I pulled out my flashlight and scanned the underbrush, half expecting to see a hog rooting around, or maybe a wounded deer. That's when I heard the rustling, not the quick skitter of an animal, but a heavy, deliberate shifting, like something big dragging itself through the water weeds. I called out, "Hey there, park ranger here," thinking maybe it was someone trespassing or a gator stirring up the mud. The sound paused, then started again, closer now. I could hear reeds parting, the soft slap of water, and a low thrumming hum that seemed to vibrate the air around me. My hand tightened on the flashlight. I'm trained to stay calm, but my heart was starting to hammer like a woodpecker on a dead tree. I edged forward, shining my beam through the cypress knees and Spanish moss, and that's when I saw it. It was a creature half submerged in the shallows, pale grey like river clay, with long ribbed fins running the length of its back. Its body was thick and strong, coiling back and forth like a giant salamander. The head rose from the water, slick and angular, with a wide mouth rimmed with soft whisker-like feelers that waved gently in the breeze. But it was the eyes that stopped me cold, round and enormous like glass marbles, reflecting the flashlight beam in a perfect white glow. The creature blinked once, and that humming sound grew louder, resonating right into my chest like standing near a subwoofer. I tried to step back, but a cypress knee snagged my boot, and I stumbled, splashing water across my shins. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it floated closer, the water parting around it in smooth ripples. The smell grew sharper, almost like iron filings and moss. My mouth went dry, and I remember thinking how absurd it was that I was about to die in my uniform with my ranger badge shining under the flashlight. Then the creature opened its mouth, and from deep inside came a soft, mournful wail, a sound so sad and human it made my eyes sting. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it vibrated through my bones. I wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't look away. The creature hovered there, half out of the water as if studying me. Droplets slid off its rubbery skin, catching the beam of my light and glittering like silver coins. It seemed to tilt its head slightly, and for a moment I had the eerie thought it was trying to speak. Then it shut its mouth, released a slow bubble of air, and sank straight down into the dark water with barely a ripple, leaving behind only floating duckweed swirling in slow circles. I stood there, shaking so hard I had to brace myself against a tree. The humming faded into silence, and the swamp sounds returned one by one, the chirp of crickets, the croak of bullfrogs, the distant flap of a heron's wings. I backed out of there, eyes darting side to side, and radioed in that I was coming off duty early. I didn't mention the creature. I didn't even know how to begin explaining it. Back at the station, I sat for a long while in the break room, staring at the steam rising off a cup of coffee, feeling like I'd brushed up against something ancient and unknowable. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to that spot in broad daylight. The water was calm, green with floating plants, and nothing seemed out of place. But near the edge of the bank, I found claw marks in the soft mud, long furrows that didn't match gator tracks or any animal I know. A piece of pale, leathery skin, about the size of my palm, lay half buried under some reeds. It felt soft and warm in my hand, like holding a living thing. I dropped it quick and watched it sink into the water. I haven't told the other rangers because they'd laugh me out of the job, but every time the sun goes down and I'm locking the park gates, I keep thinking about those glassy eyes and that low hum pulsing through the air. Folks can say what they like about swamp spirits, but I know there's something down there, swimming through the hidden channels, waiting for the right person to see it. If you liked this, stick around. The next tale is even wilder. Back in 2004, in the thick of hurricane season, I was working as a wildlife photographer for a small magazine out of Baton Rouge, and that's when I stumbled onto something in the swamps near Cocodrie that still makes my skin prickle every time I think about it. My name's Mason, and I've spent most of my adult life crawling through Louisiana's wetlands with cameras slung around my neck, trying to capture moments nobody else sees. Gators lunging, egrets dancing in mist, even the quiet hush when dawn slides across the bayou. I thought I'd witnessed every strange sight this place could throw at me. Turns out I'd barely scratched the surface. That particular September, a storm had just blown through, leaving the marshes flooded and the air hot enough to curl your hair. The sky was streaked with gold and bruised purple, and mosquitoes were rising in clouds so thick they were like black smoke. I'd been following reports of rare birds displaced by the storm, hoping to snap a few shots for the magazine. I was trudging along a soggy levee, camera wrapped in plastic, boots sinking ankle-deep in mud, when I heard an odd clicking sound. Not the creak of trees or the usual popping of branches. This was rhythmic, almost like someone tapping two stones together. I crept closer, peering between stands of cattails glistening with rainwater. That's when I saw it, a huge shape crouched low at the edge of a flooded pool. At first, I thought it was a big nutria, but then it rose up, unfolding like a shadow stretching into dawn light. Its body was lean and muscled, covered in slick, dark fur, and it stood nearly as tall as me on hind legs. It had long arms that ended in delicate, spindly fingers, and it was clicking two smooth stones together in a slow, measured rhythm. For a moment, I thought it might be some costume or a trick of the light, but then it turned its head toward me, and I saw eyes that glowed deep red, like embers banked under ash. I raised my camera out of habit, but my fingers refused to press the shutter. The creature paused its clicking, sniffed the air and tilted its head. Its nostrils flared, and I could hear it inhaling my scent across the damp space between us. Then it opened its mouth and a low warble spilled out, a sound halfway between a growl and a chant, full of guttural clicks and soft whistles. It didn't sound like an animal's noise. It sounded like language, like it was speaking to me. My knees felt weak, and my heart pounded so hard I thought my ribs might split. The creature dropped down on all fours and crept closer, moving with liquid grace over fallen branches and patches of floating duckweed. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing in the mud. The creature stopped about 10 feet away, stared straight into my eyes, then slowly submerged into the water until only ripples remained. The surface closed over it like glass. Silence settled in so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. When I finally found the nerve to move, I knelt where it had stood and found tiny footprints pressed into the mud. 5 long toes, almost human, but with claw tips that dug sharp crescents into the wet earth. The stones it had been clicking together lay nearby, slick and black, marked with strange notches like tally marks. I picked them up, but they felt warm, as if they'd been held tight in living hands. I dropped them quick and backed away. I hiked out of those woods soaked, shaking, and half afraid the creature might be pacing me through the reeds. That night, I sat in my truck outside my motel in Houma, looking at the swamp shining under the moonlight and wondering how many other things lurked out there, waiting to be discovered. I thought about going public with what I'd seen, maybe writing an article, but who would believe a wildlife photographer claiming a swamp creature tried to talk to him? Folks would laugh me right out of every newsroom from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. To this day, I've kept quiet, though sometimes late at night I hear that same rhythmic clicking echoing in my memory. And when I'm out in the marsh and the water goes still, I can't help scanning the shadows, half expecting those red eyes to blink open and look right back at me. And that's the last of my stories, for now. Thanks so much for sticking with me through all these wild tales from the Louisiana swamps. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to check out the other videos on this channel for even more mysterious encounters and backwoods legends. Stay safe out there and keep your eyes on the water.